I was never the type to snoop. But that day, something felt off, an unease gnawing at me. I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Her voice sweet as ever, but with a tone I didn't recognize, one that sent a chill down my spine. She was laughing, carefree, as if nothing in the world mattered, until I heard the words that shattered everything. "He's so naive." "He thinks I'm loyal," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. My heart dropped into my stomach. The man I loved, the one I trusted completely, had been lying to me for God knows how long. She continued, telling a friend about her affair with someone else, casually recounting how she'd been seeing him for months, sneaking behind my back. My mind went numb, the weight of betrayal crashing over me like a tidal wave. Every memory, every sweet moment, every promise we made felt like a sick joke. How could I have been so blind? How could I have been so foolish to think I was the one she chose, the one she loved? In that moment, it all came crashing down. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was destroyed. I couldn't stay there, not another second in the same house where she betrayed me. The anger, the disbelief, the hurt, it was suffocating. I left without a word, without a glance back, as if walking away could somehow erase the image of her laughter, her cruel words echoing in my mind. I drove aimlessly, my hands gripping the wheel with white knuckles, the road blurring as tears stung my eyes. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. The motel sign flickered in the distance, and I pulled in, desperate for somewhere to escape, to think, to stop feeling like I was suffocating. As the hours passed, the silence in the small room was deafening. I blocked her on every platform, Instagram, Facebook, even her number. I didn't want to hear her lies anymore, her apologies that meant nothing now. I didn't want any more promises that would be broken. She had chosen him, and I was nothing but a fool who had loved her too much. The anger boiled in me, raw and relentless. My phone rang incessantly. Family, friends, everyone trying to reach me. But I couldn't talk to anyone. Not now. Not when the pain was still so fresh, when everything I thought I knew about us had been turned into dust. I cut them all off. It was easier that way, to be alone with my thoughts, to let the rage and heartbreak consume me without anyone else's pity. I was drowning in my own grief, and the world outside didn't matter. The plan had been set. I was going to ask her to marry me. After 5 years together, I thought we were ready, that she was the one I could build a life with. I had even picked out the ring, imagining the look on her face when I dropped to one knee, asking her to be mine forever. But now everything had changed. The moment I overheard her bragging about the affair, my world shattered into a million pieces. It was as if the ground beneath me had cracked open, swallowing any hope I had left. How could I have been so blind, so naive? I had been planning our future, planning to make her my wife, while she'd been lying to me, betraying everything we had built. The rage coursing through me was replaced by a cold, bitter clarity. I didn't need her anymore. I didn't want a future with someone who could lie so easily, who could laugh about betraying me. It was like all the love I had poured into her, all the trust was suddenly meaningless. I was done. I couldn't be the man who would have proposed to her, not now, not after what I'd learned. I had to move on, to leave her behind in the past where she belonged. It hurt more than I could put into words, but the pain of loving someone who didn't deserve it was unbearable. I would never be that fool again. It was time to let go and finally find peace, even if it meant starting over alone. After everything had fallen apart, after the betrayal, I overheard her confessing so casually, I couldn't let it end like that. I had to hear the truth from her own mouth. It felt like I needed some kind of closure, some finality to the nightmare that had torn my heart apart. So, against my better judgment, I reached out to her. The moment we were face to face, the weight of her deception settled over us like a storm cloud. I could barely look at her. She was the same woman I thought I loved, but now she was a stranger, someone who had shattered my trust in the most cruel way possible. I asked her to explain, to tell me everything, and for the first time, she didn't try to deny it. She admitted to multiple affairs over the past 2 years. My mind raced. Images of every time I had been away for work, every trip I'd taken, flashing before my eyes. She used my absence as an excuse, painting a picture of how easy it had been to slip away, to sneak around behind my back. The lies, the deceit, all while I believed she was waiting for me to return, the woman I thought was faithful, loyal. She said she thought she could get away with it, that I'd never find out. Her words cut deeper than any betrayal because, in that moment, it was clear. She had never truly loved me. She had been playing a game, one that I had unwittingly lost. The finality of it all sank in. There would be no turning back, no fixing this. My heart was broken, and there was no patching it up. The moment I heard her confession, something inside me broke. I had spent 5 years building a life with her, believing we were partners, that we had something real. But the truth hit me like a freight train. Everything I knew was a lie. The woman I trusted had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. There was no fixing this. No second chances. Without saying a word, I left her apartment, the one we had shared together, the place I thought would one day be filled with memories of our future. I couldn't stand the thought of being in that space any longer, surrounded by her deceit. The next few days were a blur of cold mechanical tasks, packing up my things, getting rid of the items we had bought together, each one a painful reminder of how foolish I had been. It felt as though I was stripping away the last remnants of my hope, of the future I thought I'd had with her. I didn't have a plan, didn't know what to do, but I couldn't stay in the empty shell of the life we had built. I found refuge at my mother's house, a place where I could regroup, where I didn't have to face her or her lies anymore. But even there, the silence weighed heavily. My phone rang with messages from friends, from her, desperate to explain, but I didn't want to hear it. There was nothing she could say to undo what she'd done. The pain was overwhelming, but I had to focus on moving forward. For the first time in years, I could think about my own future. It wasn't the future I'd imagined, but it was mine. And that was the only thing that mattered now. As the days passed, the weight of betrayal settled heavily in my chest. I tried to distance myself from the chaos she had caused, but her shadow lingered in my thoughts, in every corner of the life we had once shared. I started to feel the sting of her absence, but also the relief of no longer being tethered to the lies. It was then that I learned, through a mutual friend, that she had been reaching out to everyone in her life, desperately trying to apologize, begging for forgiveness. She claimed she had made a mistake, that she was confused, that she didn't mean to hurt me. But the damage had already been done. I was no longer the man who had once believed in her words, in her promises. The woman I loved, the one I had spent 5 years with, had shattered my trust in ways I couldn't even begin to describe. I didn't need her apologies. I didn't need her lies or empty regret. I had learned enough about her deceit to know that nothing she said would change the reality of what she had done. When her messages began flooding my phone, I didn't even hesitate. I blocked her on every platform. I shut her out completely. She had no more space in my life. I had to focus on healing, on finding myself again, without her in the picture. It wasn't easy, and I didn't expect it to be. But as I moved forward, I realized that I had to rebuild from the ground up, and that meant cutting off the past. There was no room for her in my future. Only healing, only peace. For 4 years, I believed in the life we built together. My wife and I had our ups and downs, but we had a daughter, a future, and the love I thought was unshakable. But lately, things fell off. It started with small things, her constant late nights at work, the way she would rush out of the house without explaining why. The smile she gave me seemed forced, her touch colder than it used to be. The chemistry we once shared had faded, replaced by an awkward distance I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was nothing, just the pressures of life, perhaps. But then it became undeniable. Her phone was glued to her hand, and whenever I came near, she would quickly lock it or hide it from me. The excuses piled up. She was too tired for intimacy, too busy to talk. I felt like I was losing her, slipping through my fingers like sand, and I couldn't shake the growing suspicion that there was someone else. I tried to shake off the thoughts, telling myself it was just my mind spiraling out of control. But every time she left the house, I couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in my stomach. I had never felt this cold, this invisible in our marriage. The more I observed, the more the evidence mounted. Her behavior, once predictable, had become erratic. And then one night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just a phase. She was slipping away, and the man I had been, the father I'd become, couldn't accept it. Something was happening, and I wasn't sure if I could stop it. As the weeks passed, my growing suspicion of my wife's behavior turned into a suffocating reality. She'd always been a hardworking woman, a dedicated nurse who took pride in her job, but things had changed. Lately, she'd been working late much later than usual. Her shifts stretched longer, and she would come home at odd hours, her excuses becoming increasingly vague. There was a rush at the hospital, she'd say, or I had to stay to help out. But it never felt quite right. I noticed the exhaustion in her eyes, the weariness that wasn't just from work. It felt like something more. At first, I thought maybe it was just the strain of her demanding career. But when the late nights continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She stopped making time for us, our quiet dinners together, our evening walks with our daughter. We had once shared moments of closeness, intimate conversations, and small gestures of affection. But now, there was a wall between us. She'd come home tired, distant, and retreat to the bedroom, leaving me to finish dinner alone, often falling asleep on the couch. I tried to ignore the nagging voice inside me, telling myself it was just stress. But when she started pulling away physically, our intimacy dwindling, that was when I knew something was wrong. Our once passionate relationship had become a cold, empty space, and I was left grasping for answers. I tried reaching out to her, but she was always distant, too preoccupied to listen. It felt like I was living with a stranger, and it broke my heart to see the woman I loved slipping further and further away. It had been building up for weeks, and I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut any longer. The distance, the way she'd rush off to take phone calls in private, everything pointed to something I didn't want to admit. That evening, we were sitting at dinner when her phone rang. She excused herself abruptly, saying it was an urgent call. I watched her hurry out of the kitchen, her face tense, her usual carefree demeanor replaced with a cold, guarded expression. I sat there trying to shake off the unease, but it gnawed at me. Something inside me told me that this time it wasn't just another late-night shift or work-related call. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart pounded in my chest as I made a snap decision. I needed to know the truth. Quietly, I slipped on my shoes and grabbed my car keys, moving swiftly to the door. I didn't think, just acted. I drove to the grocery store she frequented, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as my mind raced. And then, when I turned the corner, there they were. My heart sank, my breath caught in my throat. She was standing in the aisle, her body pressed against another man's, laughing, her hands gently touching his arm in a way that made my blood boil. I froze, my world crumbling in that moment. They didn't even notice me at first, lost in their bubble, so caught up in their own intimacy. It was like everything I thought I knew about our life together had shattered in an instant. My wife, my partner, was with another man. The trust I had given her, the years we spent building our family, all felt like a cruel lie. My anger boiled over as I stood there, watching them, unable to move or think straight. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I had spent years building a life with, was embracing another man in public, acting as if I didn't exist. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, but I couldn't hold back. I marched straight up to them, my chest heaving with rage. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, my voice raw with hurt and disbelief. The couple froze, and the man immediately pulled away, a look of shock in his eyes. But it wasn't him. I was focused on, it was her. She looked at me, her face pale, her eyes wide with guilt. I didn't think you'd find out," she stammered, but the words felt empty, like she was trying to explain away something that could never be explained. I trusted you. I thought we had something real, I hissed, my fists clenching at my sides. All this time. All the late nights, the phone calls, and I was stupid enough to believe it was all just work. And now you're this. Her eyes welled with tears, and she reached out, her voice breaking. Please, I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could get away with it. I thought you wouldn't notice. I'm so sorry. The desperation in her voice cut through me, but it wasn't enough. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I could feel the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me, suffocating. That night, after everything had happened, she came to me, begging for forgiveness. But the words meant nothing now. I couldn't unsee what I had seen, and the trust we once had was now just a distant memory. The pain was unbearable, a suffocating weight on my chest. But as much as it hurt, I knew I had to make a decision. The woman I had loved, the mother of my child, had shattered my trust in a way that could never be repaired. That night, after everything had unfolded, I looked at her guilt, tears, and desperation in her eyes, and I knew what had to be done. I want you to leave, I said, my voice cold and final. The words tasted bitter as they left my mouth, but I couldn't keep her in our home any longer. Not after everything. Not after the betrayal. I could see her hesitating, still trying to hold on, but it was too late. She protested, begged for another chance, but I had already made up my mind. I filed for divorce the very next day, knowing that ending it was the only way forward. As painful as it was, I couldn't let my daughter grow up in a broken home, watching her mother tear apart the family we had once been. In the end, the court granted me full custody of our daughter. I watched her clinging to me that day, her little hands gripping mine tightly, and I promised her that no matter what, I would always be there for her. Despite the emotional wreckage I was still sorting through, I knew one thing for sure. I had to put my daughter first. My heart ached, but I found solace in her laughter, in the way her face lit up when we spent time together. I focused on being the father she deserved, blocking out the hurt and prioritizing her happiness and stability. She was my world now, and no matter how much the pain lingered, I was determined to be the father she could always rely on. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion, a relentless ache in my chest that wouldn't fade. It felt like my world had been torn apart, and I couldn't escape the overwhelming emotions that came crashing over me: betrayal, anger, and a profound sense of loss. Every corner of our house reminded me of the love I had once thought was solid, but now seemed like a fragile illusion. But through all the turmoil, there was one thing I knew I had to do. I had to be there for my daughter. She had seen the cracks in our family, felt the tension in the air, and she was now my responsibility, her heart and well-being in my hands. As much as I struggled with the emotional aftermath of my wife's betrayal, I couldn't allow that pain to define me in front of her. Every day was a challenge. The memories of our life together haunted me, but I focused on being the strong, loving father she needed. I spent hours helping her with homework, listening to her laugh, and offering her a sense of stability and comfort. I realized that I had to teach her the values of loyalty, respect, and trust, things that her mother had failed to uphold. Despite the lingering hurt that still clouded my thoughts, I made a vow to raise her with integrity. I would guide her through life, showing her the importance of honesty in relationships, teaching her to never settle for anything less than true loyalty. The road to healing wasn't easy, but I was determined to focus on my daughter's future, to make sure she never experienced the heartache I had gone through. She deserved to grow up knowing what love, loyalty, and trust really meant.